Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashley Manning, and I'm the COO of the National Association of Cannabis Businesses. And we're excited to talk with everybody about cannabis cash management today with our experts. A bit of quick housekeeping. Please use the chat to connect with others and also use the questions section to ask your questions about cash management. And we're going to open up for Q&A towards the end. And with that being said, I'm excited to welcome California State Treasurer Fiona Ma to speak with everyone today. Fiona Ma is California's 34th state treasurer. She was elected in November of 2018 with more votes than any other candidate for treasurer in the state's history. She's the first woman of color and the first woman certified public accountant elected to the position. For those who are unaware of what the state's treasurer's office does, they provide financing for schools, roads, housing, recycling, waste management, hospitals, public facilities, and other crucial infrastructure projects to better the lives of California residents. California is the world's fifth largest economy, and Treasurer Ma is the state's primary banker. Now I'd love to kick things off by handing it over to Treasurer Ma for some special remarks. Welcome.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Welcome. So Treasurer Ma, can you please share what's in motion for cannabis banking in general as you see it?
Yeah, so first off, I'd just like to give a little introduction of why I'm here today. I got elected to the State Board of Equalization back in 2014, and that is the elected state tax board that was supposed to be collecting sales taxes from the cannabis dispensaries. In California, we passed Prop 215 in 1996. However, when I got elected in 2015, we did not keep any data. How much was collected, who was paying, who wasn't paying. And so that started me down the path of trying to figure out the industry here in California, educating a lot of the dispensary owners because they didn't understand that they were supposed to get a sales tax permit, et cetera. Also, it was talked about that in 2016, we were going to pass or put on the ballot legalization of cannabis, which actually did happen. Prop 64 passed in 2016 with close to 57% of the vote. And so that is kind of the history of California. We passed medicinal use in 1996. Then 20 years later, we passed Prop 64. And California is probably the largest state that pays the most amount of taxes. But one of the big elephants in the room was lack of banking access. Back then, 2016, banks were not taking cannabis legally because it is still considered a Schedule I substance. However, good news is more banks are banking the industry, and I have some statistics later on that we can share. And in the meantime, Congress, I have been supporting the Safe Banking Act. I testified before Congress. That was the first time a cannabis-related bill was presented in Congress, and that was back in February of 2019. And a lot has happened since then, but it was also evident based on the members on that banking, taxation, finance committee, that people weren't really understanding the impact of cannabis and what was really happening in the marketplace. And there was a lot of congressmen from middle, United States that was saying the same mantra, right? We have a war on drugs, and I'm like, well, the war on drugs was, decades ago. Like, this is a thriving, growing industry, and we need to embrace it. We need to figure out how to tax it, and we need to figure out how to bank it for the safety of our residents. So that's kind of how I got to this place today, and I am still probably one of the leading advocates in banking the industry. I'm very active with the National Association of State Treasurers. And so we did pass a resolution a couple of years ago to support the Safe Banking Act. And again, we're still pushing and advocating and prodding and hoping that at least the Safe Banking Act will pass through Congress this year.
Treasurer Ma, thank you so much. We're honored to have you here today and giving your time to us. We'll get back to those statistics later on into the conversation. For now, I'd love to turn it over to our lead on the NACB EMC's Joint Cash Management National Standards, Kirsten Trusko. Kirsten's the CEO and co-founder of Emerging Markets Coalition, whose mission is to normalize financial services for underserved markets. Kirsten, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Treasurer Ma, thank you so much for spending your time with us. Ashley, I think you and I were going to cover real briefly, why did EMC and NACB invest so many hours into creating the cash management standards? So as the banking fintech geek half of the team, and we'll share a little more later, why it's essential, especially in an emerging market in banking. Bankers like rules, regulators like rules, accountants, CPAs like rules. So that was really what had inspired a bit of this. And we're going to get into more of that. But Treasurer Ma, given that I get to moderate, I also get to ask a couple questions. So the first one is, as a treasurer of the largest rec legal state, what do you hear from your peers in other states as their biggest challenges in dealing with cannabis cash at the state level?
I mean, it's similar to California. Back when I was on the tax board, people would come with suitcases of cash, right, to our tax agencies. Number one, it made people uncomfortable that so much cash was coming in at one time. Number two, it made the retailers very uncomfortable also, knowing that they had to keep cash in their vaults for a certain amount of time. People may, rob them, mug them on the way to paying their cash payments. And so that was always the number one concern. Also, lack of banking access, right? So many states now, I think the banks are opening up. We had our first publicly traded bank, East West Bank, banking the industry. They thankfully have taken some of the largest of our manufacturers, distributors, or retailers onto their accounts. And so that is creating a lot of safety, and also it's creating better tax revenues. However, right now we are facing a little dilemma. The legal market is doing its job. They're paying their taxes, but we have a growing illegal market that is growing. They're not being enforced, partly because of COVID. Here in California, we were authorized to hire a lot of enforcement officers at the Bureau of Cannabis Control, but it's very hard to interview and hire people during the pandemic. And that created, kind of an issue where people were growing, no one was enforcing. And then some more people were saying, well, why should I do the right thing, pay potentially up to 46% more in taxes if I can't compete against this person down the street that's not paying or not charging, that high amount of tax. And so we are still struggling with the illegal and the illicit market here in California.
I wish we had more time to talk about that, because we're hearing that just all over and federally as well. So then one other question, in a state where cannabis is legal, it's a key part of the economy. What do you hear from the states and from your peers and treasurers in states that aren't quite there yet, their points against federal legalization?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, certain elected officials in those states, they still feel like they need to be tough on cannabis. They don't see it as a medicinal, healing, solution for people who are like seniors or, veterans going through PTSD. And so that, I think, is the difference between the states that have legalized it, right? The Colorados, Washington, Oregon, Californians, Nevada, versus the other Midwest states who are still still sticking to the traditional crops that they grow, even though I consider this a crop or a plant, part of agriculture, that they are still kind of focused on the wheat and the barley and the corn, and they don't see this as part of their, as part of their mix in their states.
We certainly have some education. My family's all from Fargo, so we can start there.
Exactly.
Thank you. I hope we get to loop back again, but I know that Ashley is a taskmaster and she has asked that we go on to introduce our two additional rock stars who are rock stars in general and specifically on this topic. So Josh and Deirdra, if you can come on camera, that would be wonderful. Hey, Josh. And there's Deirdra. Lovely. So we don't want to burn a lot of time on this. Look at their LinkedIn. It's up to date. It's impressive. A couple of few interesting highlights. You'll see that Josh has been a pioneer in retail delivery and customer experience, like really making this a good experience for the customer overall. He had a really interesting background. I saw a stint there at Six Flags Magic Mountain. That had to be fun for another time. And Deirdra has been so long respected in banking. I'm so excited to get to work with her. And she's recently added to the EMC board, which is fabulous. She's not one to back down from a fight or put up with goofiness. So her firm is suing San Bernardino Sheriff and federal law enforcement over illegal and unconstitutional seizures and forfeitures. I'm sure that's for a whole nother webinar. And for me, my LinkedIn also is up to date, longtime fintech payments, and now choose to work in financial services, the edgier markets, and the kind of theme is moving money for good. So I'm delighted to be here. To get things kicked off and to show that this is interactive, there is a poll. So actually, if you're going to tee that up, if y'all can answer that, we will have that. There's another poll towards the end, but this is to help make a point that this is about engagement and interaction. So delighted. While you're doing that, we're going to tee up 3 areas of discussion today. And they are why national standards are critical in an emerging market, especially around banking. How do you build a long-term relationship with your financial institution, financial provider, and how cash can be transparent, which applies to EMC's T3. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So those are our 3 key topics. We're going to explain at a very high level and then ask everybody each of our experts here to comment. So number 1 was why standards are critical in an emerging market to banking. You'll see when you get a chance to take a look, there's steps in there for cannabis businesses. How do you pick a good bank? What kind of conversation do you have? What kinds of things do you look for? With the goal being, how do you build a long-term, stable, sustainable, collaborative relationship with your bank? Number 2 was how do you build a long-term relationship? Transparency. Emerging Markets Coalition tagline is to make all transactions transparent, traceable, taxable. So T3. This is resonating on both sides of the aisle in the state level, on the Hill with law enforcement, with IRS, with media, investors, consumer advocacy group, just transparency. And then the third is how cash can be transparent if done right. We've had a lot of folks on financial services side talk about, well, it can't be transparent. It's cash. How can you see it? But if you do it right, and we've got experts here to help us speak to that, cash can be transparent. And by making it transparent, we'll get a lot more buy-in, even from the folks that aren't so excited and as supportive about cannabis legalization at the federal level.
So we're going to close the poll at this point. So if there's anybody who would like to participate, we'd love it if you did. But otherwise, I'll be shutting it off in just a moment.
Excellent. So questions for Deirdra. If you can please put on your banking expert hat and your current role. What's your feedback on the standards from the perspective of someone who moves and handles cash daily?
No, I appreciate that. And I do actually have some great news to report. So although we did file suit with Empyreal because of the seizure, we were able to settle and get all the funds back. So the FBI and the San Bernardino County Sheriff, really have a tough job in California, as Fiona mentioned, and so we just want to make sure that we clarify that all funds were returned, and thankfully we've been able to turn a chapter, and really are working with law enforcement to be a partner to make sure that there's not that illicit money coming into the system. And one of the things that Empyreal recommends is make sure that whenever you're working with a financial institution, you understand their rules for cash. Many times they'll put some parameters on whether or not you can have an ATM. And if you can have an ATM on site, if you have access to the interior of that ATM, because unfortunately that is one of the biggest areas where people can money launder is through ATM transactions. So just being clear that you're understanding their rules so that you make sure that you can kind of deposit that cash, whether it's to the financial institution directly or through a transport company like Empyreal, where we're reporting on all the funds that we collect on behalf of those financial institutions and from you, many of our customers I'm seeing on the line here today. So just making sure that we're all on the same page as it relates to SOPs. I think one of the other things that we always recommend is whenever you hire a transporter, just make sure that you set expectations with them and you have a good conversation about where's a safe place to exchange that cash deposit. Maybe not out in the open, maybe not in front of customers. One thing we think is pretty funny in Empyreal is that some of our more lively customers will announce the money people are here. Maybe not do that. We're trying to keep everybody safe. So doing it discreetly and in a safe spot is always recommended. Last, before I jump over to Joshua for his thoughts, but we also recommend making sure that you change up the time that your cash transport comes to pick up your deposit. So whether the transporter is doing it and recommending it, or you can lead that effort, it's really important because there are a number of incidences where people are casing cannabis businesses looking for that hour to 2 hour time frame where they see somebody coming to do that cash exchange. And then they end up going in and either holding up the facility or holding up the transporter. So it's really important to make sure you vary up that time for everybody's safety and security.
Excellent. Joshua, what would your feedback be, given your perspective?
Well, I very much appreciate Deirdre's thoughts, as I definitely echo some of my own sentiments. I definitely want to echo not setting patterns for any sort of cash pickup situation. And not giving that opportunity away. Also, internally, creating your own regular and random to the staff audits internally. So really hammering down on that. When it comes to employee hiring, I mean, it can be, I'll use a metaphor from construction work: measure twice, cut once. I mean, really do the background check work and wait till that comes back and really make sure that you have the right person. Call their references, take the time to do that and really make sure that they're quality references. And I think that that's gone a long way to help make sure that we have the best people for the job. So yeah, I completely agree with everything Deirdre said as well. Yeah, I think those are some ground level tips, I would say.
Excellent. And Josh, I appreciate that, because you saw in the standards, there's a good bit of detail on if it's somebody who's going to be handling money, how maybe that measure twice, cut once advice applies in spades. So thanks for pointing it out. Deirdre, safety or security tips for operators, especially those who are doing real high value exchanges?
Absolutely. So one thing that we're seeing a lot of the larger MSOs and even the mid-range folks really embrace are cash recyclers and smart safes. So that's one way that you can try to protect your cash while it's either a front of the office used for your cashiers or your bud tenders, or you could do it back of the office, but making sure that those cash drawers have a limited number of cash, a limited amount of cash in them on a regular basis, that they're clearing out every 15, 20 minutes, whatever works out for your particular store is really important to keep everybody safe. And if you do have a smart safe or a cash recycler, making sure that that's connected to your alarm system. A lot of people forget that. They also forget to tell their commercial liability company that they have a smart safe or cash recycler on site. So if funds are taken, that might not be included in your policy. So make sure you check that as well, because we want to make sure that if there is a robbery, that you guys can be made whole as much as possible.
Absolutely. And, it came up, Treasurer Ma, at the beginning when you were talking about cash being the biggest issue. This is an invitation, not to put you on the spot. Do you have anything to add?
I do. So here in California, I will just give you an example. Two categories, distributors and retailers. In 2018, 59% of the distributors paid in cash. Today, it is 11%. For retailers, 2018, it was 37%, and today it is 19%. So that means good news. More banks are banking, less cash is coming in, but there is still people that are operating in cash. And like Deirdra and Joshua said, it's very, very important that you understand, change your habits, make sure you have good internal controls for all this, and less people that knows about what's really going on, when it's going, obviously is going to be more helpful. We've had a number of robberies in the Oakland area recently. Most of them are small minority owned businesses, which is devastating for these smaller, operators that, margins are tight. They don't have a lot of capital reserves. And so one robbery, could pretty much, maybe wipe these folks out. So it is really important what you're all talking about here.
Excellent. And as you talk to others, your peers, are they seeing those same trends of the reduction in cash payments?
I don't know in other states. I know that obviously theft and robberies and all of that is a concern in all the different states. And so that is the reason that our National Association of State Treasurers in all these states are really pushing for more banking access.
Excellent. Well, and hopefully we'll see you at National Association of State Treasurers conference coming up, because it's the things you are saying from your experience are so invaluable to the others, especially the ones that might not understand that this is medicinal and there's all these benefits to it. Lovely. So we've got a little bit of time in here. So Danica, and Ashley, unless you've got something else you want me to do in the next few minutes, I'd like to go back to Treasurer Ma on something you'd shared earlier. I don't hear anybody chirping at me, so I think I get to ask. When we talked about driving transactions to be transparent, traceable, taxable, and you nodded and said, that was good. Any insights as we NACB and EMC, so we've got the cannabis related businesses and the financial services coming together to carry a message. Any finer points you would put on that, especially as we speak to treasurers?
Well, I mean, you came from the fintech industry. I know there are a lot of fintech companies that approach me and say, hey, we've got a blockchain idea, or, how about digital currency? What do you guys think about that? And, as we are advancing in these sectors, especially in cannabis, we're open to all types of options. For California, right now, there's really no excuse that retailers and distributors, when they collect the tax, they should be able to automatically transmit it to the agencies, get it out of the account. Because when too much cash is sitting there and there's an emergency, what happens? People dip into it. And then if you're not paying your taxes, that's when you're going to get in trouble. So as soon as you collect it, we should be able to, transmit it or put it into, the tax agency, CDTFA, and then they can apply it, when they do their monthly or quarterly statements. But there's no reason that in these days, this day and age, that people have to keep that much amount of cash sitting in their, in their vaults or in their bank accounts for, months or 3 months, quarterly. I mean, it's just, to me, I just don't know why we haven't been able to do instantaneous transmittals.
Well, that would certainly be fabulous from a safety perspective. And even when visiting with folks on the Hill that are maybe not as open-minded, and they say, well, how big of a problem can it be in some of these states where there aren't as many banking options? And when you share with them the amount of cash that might be on hand, then it switches from a stubborn perspective to a safety and security perspective, that if that money is there, we've got to make people safe and secure.
Yeah. So in 2021, for example, we collected $1.3 billion in tax revenues. 1.3 billion. That's how much it is here in California. And if 1.3 is sitting in people's homes, their offices, who knows where else, trying to protect it, I mean, that is a lot of money and a lot of temptation. So we should get it into our processing systems, get the cash out as quickly as possible so that, we don't have to put so much time and effort into security and safety protocols.
Absolutely. Josh and Deirdra, you want to make any comments on all the cash?
In the NACB guide, it has a section on expense reporting, and I want to take it one step further. Something that we've implemented is expense verifications, and really making sure that someone from the team has a chance to review any upcoming expenses that are needed by the staff. So that has been really helpful. And for our drivers, we have cash drop boxes that drivers don't have access to. And I feel like that's made, their safety a higher priority, and that they know that their safety is a higher priority in our mind, and just making sure that we, are doing everything we can to keep compliant, but also make sure that we can be flexible in our payment options. So doing what we can.
Excellent. Deirdre?
Yeah, I would just like to echo that sentiment. I think having good SOPs around cash is extremely important, not only for your internal staff, but making sure your customers know what form of payments that you take. There are some folks that have cashless ATMs or have other forms of payment that they take locally. So just making sure everybody's on the same page on how to handle payments. I think a lot of folks also forget in their SOPs, and thankfully the guide is such a great resource, but they don't always address how to do the audits, how to do the dual control, how to make sure that you have safety practices in place when you open and close the store, so that when the folks come in the next morning, that they have like an all clear sign or something to indicate that it's safe to come inside. These are some basic things that you can implement pretty easily. There's a lot of great resources online in addition to the guidance that was provided, but having just some basic conversations around cash. I know that you're training so many folks these days on operations and other procedures that cash sometimes gets forgotten, but it really is an important component of what you do every day, and keeping your employees and your cash safe is paramount.
Excellent. So we are a bit ahead of time, which means I think we're going to have a little more time for Q&A here too. Right now, as we transition, because you're here, you get to hear from Aisha Espy. There is a really cool grant program that's the embassy, the Israeli U.S. embassy. Aisha is fabulous. Her energy is incredible, and I would love her to tell a little bit about that.
So hello, it's great to meet everyone. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Economic and Trade Mission at the Embassy of Israel. The Economic and Trade Mission supports bilateral partnerships between Israel and the U.S. We focus predominantly on commercial and R&D partnerships. Last year, we had the liberty to partner with NACB to support our R&D initiatives under new economies, for which we've identified cannabis and hemp. We kindly invite NACB members to apply for our bilateral grant opportunities, BIRD and BARD. BIRD is the Binational Industrial Research and Development Fund. It is a non-competitive bilateral grant in which an Israeli company and a US company have to partner with, or an entity to be more precise. This will help you with 50% of your funding opportunities for R&D research, and the award is up to $1.5 million US. Acceptable programs must be on a shared risk basis. Successful projects must pay back the grant with no interest. but unsuccessful projects do not need to do any type of repayment. BIRD does not take any type of equity in the projects whatsoever, and the projects must adhere to U.S. federal law. BARD, on the other hand, is our binational agricultural research and development fund, which is a competitive bilateral funding program that supports agricultural projects, including hemp and cannabis, under for the bilateral partnerships of U.S. and Israeli scientists and researchers. The duration of the award is 3 years with a 1-year feasibility. The award is up to $310K, and the submission time is going to be around mid-September. It has not officially been announced yet. I'm so sorry about that. But the opening point of the submission should be around mid-August. BIRD also has the following, which are postdoctoral, grad student, and research fellowships that are applicable to certain researching and also institutions that are focusing on hemp and cannabis research. The Economic and Trade Mission is here to assist you if any type of matchmaking. And also BIRD will be here, BIRD is there to assist you with any type of grant support, which we'll be happy to give you further information. Thank you so much, Kristen, for the introduction.
Well, thank you for sharing. I know a lot of companies, both on the EMC side and the NACB side, are earlier stage and are very innovative. And it sounds like there could be ideas perking here that would be a good fit for those grants. So thank you so much for sharing those.
Absolutely.
So folks, while you're thinking of what you want to be asking in our Q&A section, we're going to our lightning round, which is each of the experts sharing 2 quick kind of tips of the trade for cash management that you can implement now. And that reminds me of something I forgot to say when Josh and Deirdra were sharing about how to do stuff, audits, self-assessments, things like that. If you go on to either EMC or NACB's website, you'll see the standard, the national standard there. Coming out soon are self-assessment tool and checklist. And we're working on putting together what we're calling impact chats, which would be once you do your self-assessment, now what? So 30 minutes to talk to an expert to talk a little bit about what the impact might be of what you found, and then you can choose what you'd like to do with that. But we always try to make sure when we work together that it's not just this long Bible. I think this one's 27 pages, right? But that there's also actionable items, and that's the goal too of today. So Treasurer Ma, you are welcome to give your two tips as well. I'm going to kick off as the banker geek on a couple of tips. One is when you're choosing any financial services vendor, and we'll focus on banking for right now, you want a long-term partner, not just a vendor. So these 3 tips, ask your other cannabis business colleagues and expert friends on the financial services space who they'd recommend for a long-term partner and why. For those of us in this market for a while, we see different providers come and go, and we hear a lot at conferences. That's what really irritates people. So find a long-term partner. And then once you found them, be transparent. And we've got tips for that in the standards. And then there's also tips in the standards for being ready for your first meeting with this banker. Be able to answer their questions that are on the checklist with a confident yes. And for those where you're working on it, be honest with that as well. So hopefully those tips are helpful. Treasurer Ma, did you have some, or you want to wait till the end?
No, I have 2. In California, we have a program called Cal Savers, and the deadline for any employer who employs 5 or more employees and does not offer a retirement savings account, that deadline is coming up this June 30th. And the people that are subject to this mandate are cannabis companies that are able to electronically make these payroll deductions electronically via a bank. So for those of you who have a bank account and don't offer a retirement savings account and hire 5 or more employees, which I'm sure most of you do, please look at calsavers.com because we do have a deadline, a mandate deadline. Secondly, There are not a lot of programs, as we know, that came through COVID that are eligible for cannabis companies. However, in the state of California, we're lucky that the governor deemed cannabis companies an essential industry, and therefore they were able to continue to operate during this COVID time. There is one program that I have under my treasurer's office. It's called GoGreenFinancing.com. We offer very competitive rates through participating lenders if you want to upgrade your facilities, whether it's LED lighting or windows, doors, anything that really helps to save and cut down on your energy costs. So that is GoGreenFinancing.com. Those are my two.
That is really impressive, especially since we get a lot of calls in as the finance folks on retirement and how can we offer retirement and comparable benefits with other legal businesses. Wow. Deirdra, your quick tips.
Yeah, tough act to follow from Treasurer Ma. Those were such great tips. One thing that I think a lot of the industry might still be a little confused on is Safe Banking Act. We're seeing some retooling happen on that front, but it does not address any payments. So electronic payments like Visa and MasterCard coming in, unfortunately, is not part of the scope today. So just make sure that you have a plan for what type of payments that you are going to enable at your locations, and make sure you vet the different solutions thoroughly, because we are seeing a lot of fraud in that regard. So if cash isn't 100% coming in and you need other payment solutions, just make sure that you vet those properly. And then next, we get a lot of questions around change. We still are under change restrictions from the Federal Reserve Bank. The only lift that we have seen now from the Federal Reserve is they have allowed us to get more pennies, which we all need, right? So just make sure that you understand that when you're ordering change, whether it be from your financial institution or your transporter, that there are still restrictions. And so if you have the ability to keep change on site, please do so, because yeah, we're still seeing shortages in that area.
Wow. Josh?
First, I would have to just echo the sentiment of finding solid long-term financial partners in banking or payment processing relationships. That'll, absolutely pay dividends later on. Just making sure that you're with the right companies. I'd be remiss not to mention my banker Chad over at PayQuick, who's set up multiple cannabis organizations with bank accounts very quickly. And then two, engaging secure cash pickup services has been really key for when we're getting into the high volume cash. When you're low or medium volume, whatever you consider that, paying our vendors in cash worked out, but you still need to be very wary of filing Form 8300 for the IRS when cash transactions get over $10,000. So as our cash volume has gone up, we found that just using the secure cash pickup services has saved us a lot of headache in terms of the safety aspect, as well as taking our own internal employees' time on handling the cash correctly and filing forms and all that. So I definitely advocate for that when possible.
Excellent. And
Kirsten, if I may
Yes.
chime in,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we don't overlook the building banking relationships piece that was also in there for discussion. And because we are a little bit ahead of schedule, want to make sure we fit that one in.
Absolutely. So we're going to touch on that. Let me go back just real quick to what Deirdra said about change and cash restrictions. I get to serve on the Fed Bank Faster Payments Council, and we're getting them to do a cannabis discussion group. That hasn't really come up in that discussion group. So this just shows how the voice of the field, what's actually happening in the trenches, can be brought back. I mean, who knows what'll happen with it, but at least we get a chance to tee it up face to face, which is fabulous. So to Danika's point, banking relationships, one of the pieces in the standards, the national standard, is about the relationship. I think each one of us has touched upon the importance of a long-term relationship, not just a patch, a temporary patch. So in working towards those banking relationships, Deirdra, you come out of banking, you've read the standards. What might be some counsel that you would share from the banking side?
Yeah, so in addition to Empyreal Logistics, I also still work in banking and compliance and helping financial institutions make decisions around Bank Secrecy Act compliance and anti-money laundering compliance. And one thing that I hear on the financial institution side is just, it's frustrating because there is no protocol or rules that are clear for cannabis banking. So a lot of it is up to interpretation. So I just encourage the industry, when you're shopping for a financial institution relationship and you're seeing different things or different requirements, find a financial institution that you think has robust compliance. Maybe you'll feel like it's onerous, but typically those are the financial institutions that are going to last the longest, have a long-standing program because they have a culture of compliance. They're working with their regulators. They're making sure they're checking all the boxes. Again, we as financial institution experts have our own interpretations of what the FinCEN guidance means. Ultimately, the previous Cole memorandum, how to interpret that as financial institution folks. And so I find that the most compliant financial institutions are typically the ones that you can count on to be there for you now and in the future.
Absolutely. I would add to that, asking as you're talking to whomever the business banker is, has your board bought in to cannabis as a vertical that you're addressing? Because that makes a big difference. Sometimes when banks pull out, it's because somebody in the board went sideways with it. Treasurer Ma, if you're comfortable to share, you've engaged a number of banks in some of these programs, like the lending program you were talking about. Anything you would add to the conversation on long-term bank relationships?
Well, like you said, not all banks are willing to take cannabis money. It really depends on the board and their level of risk and understanding of this industry. But there are a number that have taken, are banking the industry, but it is very onerous to get these accounts, as you know. The background checks, the amount of documentation that you have to submit. It's not only just you, but it's, your spouse, your family, people that are serving on your boards potentially are all going to be subject to, background checks. And so, choose, your partners wisely, choose who is on your board, because everybody is going to be subject to these compliance checks. And so I'm sure Josh and Deirdra will also agree. Also, certain banks I know want to diversify. So they want to take a certain amount of retailers, distributors, manufacturers, transporters. So if you go and go to a bank that other people have gone to in the industry and they're like, I'm sorry, we're not taking any more. It's not about you necessarily, but it's about their diversification strategy that they don't want to take too many of one. So you just have to kind of shop around.
That is a really good point. And when the bank examiners come in, you get a little extra scrutiny as the bank if you're too concentrated in any one vertical. So I would agree with that entirely. Also, if you want to geek out on what the banks are going to look for, look up beneficial ownership. Any business that's coming in as a new business to a bank, they'll look for who has high percentages of control of what happens or high concentration of verticals. So it's not necessarily a special root canal just for cannabis. It's for businesses, high cash businesses. So with that, we've got Q&A time in here. And we have, Ashley, have we done our second poll yet?
Negative.
Okay.
We can do that now.
Why don't we do that now? And while you're looking at the poll, maybe think about some of the questions. And there's been some great questions submitted in here in the chat. Also, if there are areas where you would like a deeper dive, please put that in the chat, because then we'll know where to build more chats like this.
So the question is, what would be most helpful to you in your current state of your written policies? And we'd love it if everybody could chime in.
Excellent. That'll help us to understand what out of the standards, maybe we need more detail or to build more out. So I'll start with some of the questions. While a smaller population, Florida does not tax medical cannabis at any level, and we don't have rec. We have a smaller legal market overall. Is that a common theme for medical states, and would that help the California market as to how medical cannabis is taxed too? Treasurer Ma, I think that might be for you.
Okay, it's been a while since I've dealt with the medicinal, because we've been in full legalization. But as I understand, in order not to be taxed, you have to have a card, right? Otherwise, for medicinal, you still have to pay the sales tax just like everybody else. I don't know if that has changed through legislation, but yes, usually medicinal is the first step for states to get into this industry and this market. Once people feel comfortable about it, then the next step is, folks trying to put it on the ballot to have full adult. And in California, it was 20 years, a difference of 20 years since we passed medicinal to when we passed full adult licensing. So sometimes it does take a while, but these days, I think there's 19 states that have passed full adult use. So more and more states are passing initiatives at the state level or even through their legislature. And it's just a matter of time, I think. And pretty much most of the states have some, except a couple, have either medicinal and or adult.
Absolutely. And Treasurer Ma, to add to that, and talking to folks, states that are evolving in their thinking on this, you shared at the top of the call about tax revenues that have come in from this business sector. Would it be helpful as we're out evangelizing to talk about not just the level of funds, but perhaps how they're being used for education? Or is there anything to share that might be helpful in that?
Well, I mean, in California, the initiative process is one of the, I guess, like the best way for folks who don't want to work through the legislature. So when you work a bill through the legislature, there's a lot of compromises, amendments in order to get through the two houses, the different committees to the governor's desk. And when people don't want to do that, then you need a lot of money to get signatures on the ballot, or you have to get 2/3 of the legislature to put something on the ballot. And in this case, both of them were through the initiative process. So what was your question again?
Oh, it was around the money that comes in for taxes. What's it being spent for a greater good?
Yeah, so Prop 64, I was active with the authors of Prop 64. What you put in initiative at the state level pretty much supersedes what the legislature puts on. And that's why the legislature was so actively engaged before 2016 to try to pass certain things so that the voters wouldn't override all the things that we wanted. Unfortunately, Prop 64 had very specific, things in the initiative, like a 15% distribution tax, a certain cultivation tax, where the money was going to go. And it's hard to change that. So if people want to know, where the funds are going, look up the language in Prop 64. And right now we are trying to run different initiatives through the legislature to try to change parts of Prop 64 with 2/3 of the vote. The one I'm supporting is a Bradford bill that would get rid of the cultivation tax, would decrease the distribution tax from 15% to 11%, and have the CDTFA collect all of the taxes and not have all these different agencies, because it's really, really hard for folks in the industry to have to comply. If you have to keep filing different tax forms with different tax agencies, eventually you will get in trouble. And once you get in trouble with one, it's really hard to get out of trouble. So just having everything centralized to one agency is what I'm hearing the industry would really like.
So one of the questions that's come in is kind of related to that. And the person is saying that there's been a lot in the news about, and the word used here, I'm just reading it, is onerous taxing policies in California, and that might be fueling some of the gray market growth. What initiatives are is California considering to address this?
Yeah, I know at the beginning of this year, there were about 20 bills having to do with the cannabis industry. And I'm not sure how many are still left as we are moving to the second house, but I'll just give you an example. In 2020, we collected $1.1 billion through our tax agency. 2021, we collected 1.3 billion. So went up a little bit. This year, the first quarter, we've only collected 294 million. And if you multiply it by 4 quarters, that's 1.1 billion. So we're going back down the other way. And that's because of, I believe, the illicit market, the fact that the taxes are way too high, not only in Prop 64, but locals can also assess their own tax. And everybody thinks this is the golden goose. So they say, oh, well, let's assess another 15%, at the local level on top of all the other taxes. And that's pretty much the problem with California, the way Prop 64 was set up.
And what you had talked about with the Bradford bill and having just the CDFA collect would simplify things and likely drop the tax levels?
Well, yeah. So the bill says get rid of the cultivation tax, decrease the distribution tax from 15 to 11%, but local governments can also assess, and that there's nothing in those bills to address that. In the past, there have been different bills that have been trying to get around that, but they haven't made it to the governor's desk yet.
Interesting. Well, not for this call because it's its own topic, but when we talk about tax, it makes everybody think, maybe everybody think of 280E. And the IRS at the federal level. From a past industry I was in, we were able to go to the IRS and get some fix on the treatment. But Treasurer Ma?
Yes, 280E is a problem. In California, we do allow all cannabis companies to deduct all of their expenses, just like any other business, against their revenues. However, at the federal level, it is only cost of goods sold. And so that is a problem. We need to lobby our federal elected officials to change that as more and more states are passing legalization initiatives, that is unfair. It's an undue burden. It's way too high. In addition to all the other taxes now, you're not able to deduct your payroll and, your rent and, all of those other expenses that other normal businesses. So that's like next after Safe Banking Act, in my opinion.
Excellent. Well, we've got a lot of work to do together on that. So a question, this is probably for Deirdra and Josh. How should business owners work on their relationship with money when they are hesitant to add debt?
Josh, do you want to jump in or should I jump in?
I can definitely, I empathize heavily. The rates given to cannabis companies sometimes are not the best, and you want to be careful about where you're getting the money lended from. So, and that it's not too onerous to keep up with. Though cannabis companies haven't been able to go into bankruptcy, I think the next thing that they've been considering is a receivership, just something very similar. So it's definitely not good to get in over your head with the debt. I know that's caused some companies' founders to lose control of their company in the past in the industry. So be very careful and try to find relationships that again are gonna be they're gonna make it so that you're not going to get over your head and they understand your cash flow. And they're not just trying to be a loan shark in the industry. I believe that Bespoke got a good amount of funding to help finance and debt finance a lot of things that are necessary, on the retail perspective to help catch up on vendor funds or help finance cultivation. So look for those vendors that are friendly to the industry and also don't have onerous rates.
Excellent. Deirdra?
So I think part of that long-term strategy for finding a financial institution is just getting their stance on cannabis lending. We are seeing a lot of hard money lenders come into the industry with rates that are criminal, in my opinion. And there's a lot of financial institutions that are starting, they've gotten comfortable, they've gotten their regulators comfortable with cannabis banking, so now they're going to start to lend. It might not necessarily translate into working capital, like lines of credit, but typically equipment loans, real estate loans, that's where they're getting their start. The other avenue that you can look at is there are many states that are offering social equity lending as part of their state initiatives. I know that Illinois is one of the leaders in this space. We're seeing Colorado and Massachusetts also consider similar. So check with your state to see where they are as it relates to lending for SBA type programs.
Right.
Excellent. And Treasurer Ma, you shared with us the gogreenfinancing.com.
Yep, gogreenfinancing.com. Yeah, for those of you who are looking to make improvements, to increase your efficiency, save money on energy costs. Lots of energy goes into these businesses, so gogreenfinancing.com.
Excellent. Well, and we're going to wrap in a minute, but to hit some of the highlights, first of all, it was a huge highlight that Treasurer Ma would spend this whole time with us. We had Josh and Deirdra as incredible experts. We learned about from Aisha, the grants. Speaking of money, we've heard now about the 2 California programs, about the Saver to be able to offer retirement benefits, and the Go Green lending. We've heard about the standards, and it is worthwhile, read through them, but watch for Friday. There'll be an email coming out that will talk about these actionable tools, the self-assessment, the checklist. We'll be getting back to you more on these impact chats. So once you do the self-assessment, now what? So that could be helpful. Ashley, do you have anything you'd like to add from the NACB side?
I do not. I want to thank everybody for their time today and future ongoing events. Please make sure you tune in. Our next event is going to be on July 17th next month, and Aisha will be there, where we'll be facilitating some introductions and overview of the program to make sure you're qualified for it, and so we can further address any questions. Like Kirsten said, be on the lookout for that email that'll come out tomorrow with some action items, and I think that's one of the most important parts when you attend these webinars, especially regarding cannabis cash management, is that there's action followed after this conversation. We're not just talking, we have something. There will also be a letter that you can sign and send to Congress about pushing to pass SAFE as well. So if anybody else has any tools or resources we can send out to our network, that would be fantastic. Feel free to send it over. And if anybody has any questions regarding the Israeli program, feel free to reach out to me at info@nacb.com. And as always, thank you to our members, our partners, because without all of you, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. So thank you, everyone.
Excellent. And we were very sincere. If you've got questions, if there were topics we didn't get into much more deeply, SAFE is one of them that comes to mind. You can email in either to Ashley or into EMC, which is support@emcoalition.org. We'd like to know what it is you'd like to learn more about, so the bankers and the cannabis businesses can work together and evangelize together. Treasurer Ma, did you have any closing comment?
No, also I have a dedicated email, ask Fiona at treasure.ca.gov, and one of my specialists, Catherine Asprey, that's all she does is respond to emails, text messages, phone calls to try to solve your problems or connect you with the person that can help you. So please feel free to reach out to us too.
Thank you for your engagement and your leadership. And thanks to everyone that put so many hours into the cash management national standards. Next coming, we're all working on payments best practices. So if you're interested, contact one of us. It's a lively topic. And with that, I think we're done. We ran a minute over. Thank you, everyone. And please do be responsive. Let us know what you'd like to know more about.